We've been talking about the doctrine of the Holy Trinity as found in the Old Testament Scriptures. Specifically, we've been looking at the first book of Samuel. Last week we talked about the person and work of the Holy Spirit. We continue where we left off, where we were taught about how the Lord our God raised up the first king and anointed Saul, and the Holy Spirit gifted him for service to free the Israelites from the oppression to the Ammonites. However, Saul rejected and rebelled against the Lord his God and refused to listen to the Lord's word. Thus the Lord rejected Saul as king and replaced him with David. Replaced him with David. And so chapter 16 in 1 Samuel says this, at verse 14. Now the Spirit of the Lord departed from Saul, and a harmful spirit from the Lord tormented him. As the Lord rejected Saul and removed his spirit from him, we are taught to make a distinction between the persons of the Holy Trinity. We make a distinction between the Lord and the person of the Holy Spirit. In fact, in the previous chapter, back in chapter 15, we are taught to make a distinction between all three persons of the Holy Trinity. And back in chapter 15, verses 26 through 29, we read this, I will not return with you. This is Samuel and Saul speaking, so Samuel speaking to Saul, for you have rejected the word of the Lord, and the Lord has rejected you from being king over Israel. As Samuel turned to go away, Saul seized the skirt of his robe, and it tore. And Samuel said to him, the Lord has torn the kingdom of Israel from you this day, and has given it to a neighbor of yours, who is better than you, and also the glory of Israel will not lie or have regret, for he is not a man that he should have regret. This is 1 Samuel chapter 15, verses 26 through 29. Samuel here makes reference to the glory of Israel. Now, to be clear, the glory of Israel is not a concept, it is a person. The glory of Israel does not lie or have regret. The glory of Israel is not a man. So who is the glory of Israel? He is the second person of the Holy Trinity. He is the incarnational presence of God in the midst of the people of Israel. In fact, earlier in 1 Samuel, back at chapter 4, we learned that the Ark of the Covenant was taken by the Philistines. In response, we hear of the birth of a child named Ichabod. Now, verses 21 and 22 state this, and she named the child Ichabod, saying, the glory has departed from Israel, because the ark of God had been captured, and because of her father-in-law and her husband. And she said, the glory has departed from Israel, for the ark of God has been captured. You see, in the days of Samuel, Eli the high priest and his wicked sons, Hophni and Phinehas, refused to listen to the Lord. They used the Ark of the Covenant in a superstitious way, assuming that if they brought it into battle, the Lord would favor them. However, the Lord rejected them and took his presence away from them. The Lord had promised to be physically present amongst his people, Israel, for their benefit. It is the glory of the Lord, which is the incarnational presence of God, who dwelt above the wings of the cherubim on top of the Ark of the Covenant. The Ark had been housed in the tabernacle since the days of Moses. The tabernacle and the Levitical priesthood and sacrifices had been instituted by God himself. The Lord had promised to dwell in the midst of his people in a physical, tangible way. The people were assured that where the Ark of the Covenant was located, the invisible divine essence of God was present, making them holy. Abuna, I give to you the microphone for translation. We continue. In Exodus chapter 16, we learn about the incarnational presence of God, known as the glory of the Lord, the Kavod Yahweh. We read starting at verse 4. Then Moses starting at verse 4. Then the Lord said to Moses, Behold, I am about to rain bread from heaven for you, and the people shall go out and gather a day's portion every day, that I may test them, whether they will walk in my law or not. On the 6th day, when they prepare what they bring in, it will be twice as much as they gather daily. So Moses and Aaron said to all the people of Israel, At evening you shall know that it was the Lord who brought you out of the land of Egypt. And in the morning you shall see the glory of the Lord, because he has heard your grumbling against the Lord. For what are we that you grumble against us? That's Exodus chapter 16, verses 4 through 7. Here the Lord promised Moses that the people would see the glory of the Lord, which would assure them of God's favor. The glory of the Lord can be seen bodily. When one sees the glory of the Lord, one sees the Lord. The visible presence of the glory of the Lord assures the people that the Lord is with them. At the same time, we are taught to make a distinction in persons between the person of the Lord and the person of the glory of the Lord. The glory of the Lord has heard the grumbling against the Lord. In a passage like this, we see the Lord talking about the Lord just as a person would talk about another person. Continuing in the same chapter at verse 9, we read the following. Then Moses said to Aaron, Say to the whole congregation of the people of Israel, Come near before the Lord, for he has heard your grumbling. And as soon as Aaron spoke to the whole congregation of the people of Israel, they looked toward the wilderness, and behold, the glory of the Lord appeared in the cloud. And the Lord said to Moses, I have heard the grumbling of the people of Israel. Say to them, At twilight you shall eat meat, and in the morning you shall be filled with bread. Then you shall know that I am the Lord your God. That's Exodus chapter 16, verses 9 through 12. Now, to come before the Lord is to go before his face. The glory of the Lord is the face of the Lord. The glory of the Lord appears before the people of Israel in the cloud, showing forth his divinity. In chapter 24 in the same book of Exodus, we read more about the incarnational presence of the Lord. Starting at verse 15, we read this. Then Moses went up on the mountain, and the cloud covered the mountain. The glory of the Lord dwelt on Mount Sinai, and the cloud covered it 6 days. And on the 7th day he called to Moses out of the midst of the cloud. Now the appearance of the glory of the Lord was like a devouring fire on the top of the mountain in the sight of the people of Israel. Moses entered the cloud and went up on the mountain. And Moses was on the mountain 40 days and 40 nights. This is Exodus chapter 24, verses 15 through 18. The people of Israel gathered around Mount Sinai, where the presence of the Lord dwelt in their midst. He was physically and visibly present. Yet, the Israelites were not supposed to live in this place forever. It was a temporary site used for the preparations to enter into the Promised Land. As the Lord dwelt physically in their midst at Mount Sinai, he promised to be in the midst at the tabernacle as they headed into the land promised to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. We continue in the book of Exodus. Exodus closes in chapter 40 with these words. Then the cloud covered the tent of meeting, and the glory of the Lord filled the tabernacle, and Moses was not able to enter the tent of meeting because the cloud settled on it. The glory of the Lord filled the tabernacle. Throughout all their journeys, whenever the cloud was taken up from over the tabernacle, the people of Israel would set out. But if the cloud was not taken up, then they did not set out till the day that it was taken up. For the cloud of the Lord was on the tabernacle by day, and fire was in it by night, in the sight of all the house of Israel throughout all their journeys. This is Exodus chapter 40, verses 34 through 38. In the book of Leviticus, we learn about the Lord's institution of the Levitical priesthood and their sacrifices at the tabernacle before the presence of the Lord. In Leviticus chapter 9, we read this: "And they brought what Moses commanded in front of the tent of meeting, and all the congregation drew near and stood before the Lord. And Moses said, This is the thing that the Lord commanded you to do, that the glory of the Lord may appear to you." This is Leviticus 9, verses 5 through 6. Once again, we are taught that the glory of the Lord is the tangible and physical presence of the Lord. It can be seen with the eyes. The chapter goes on to state this: "And Moses and Aaron went into the tent of meeting, and when they came out, they blessed the people, and the glory of the Lord appeared to all the people, and fire came out from before the Lord and consumed the burnt offering and the pieces of fat on the altar. And when all the people saw it, they shouted and fell on their faces." Now these two verses are from Leviticus chapter 9. The first set of verses was verses 5 through 6, and the second set is verses 23 through 24. Here we see the glory of the Lord dwelling above the wings of the cherubim on top of the Ark of the Covenant in the tabernacle. Now later in the days of King Solomon, the dwelling place of the Lord would be in the temple at Jerusalem. In 1 Kings chapter 8, we learn about the dedication of the temple. And we read this: "And they brought up the ark of the Lord, the tent of meeting, and all the holy vessels that were in the tent. The priests and the Levites brought them up, and King Solomon and all the congregation of Israel, who had assembled before him, were with him before the ark, sacrificing so many sheep and oxen that they could not be counted or numbered. Then the priests brought the ark of the covenant of the Lord to its place in the inner sanctuary of the house, in the most holy place, underneath the wings of the cherubim. For the cherubim spread out their wings over the place of the ark, so that the cherubim overshadowed the ark and its poles. And the poles were so long that the ends of the poles were seen from the holy place before the inner sanctuary. But they could not be seen from outside, and they were there to this day. There was nothing in the ark except the 2 tablets of stone that Moses put there at Horeb, where the Lord had made a covenant with the people of Israel, when they came out of the land of Egypt. And when the priests came out of the holy place, a cloud filled the house of the Lord, so that the priest could not stand to minister because of the cloud. For the glory of the Lord filled the house of the Lord." This is from 1 Kings chapter 8, verses 4 through 11. As the glory of the Lord filled the tabernacle in the days of Moses and Aaron, the glory of the Lord filled the temple in the days of Solomon. We continue. It is important to note some other events in which the glory of the Lord appeared visibly to the people of Israel. First, the glory of the Lord appeared to the people during the rebellion against Moses and Aaron, in which the people desired to elect a new leader and return to Egypt. In Numbers chapter 15, we read about this account. "Then all the congregation raised a loud cry, and the people wept that night. And all the people of Israel grumbled against Moses and Aaron. The whole congregation said to them, Would that we had died in the land of Egypt, or would that we had died in this wilderness. Why is the Lord bringing us into this land to fall by the sword? Our wives and our little ones will become a prey. Would it not be better for us to go back to Egypt? And they said to one another, Let us choose a leader and go back to Egypt." Now that's Numbers chapter 14, verses 1 through 4. The chapter continues at verse 10, in which it states this: "Then all the congregation said to stone them with stones. But the glory of the Lord appeared at the tent of the meeting to all the people." That's chapter 14, verse 10. And later on, it states this in verse 20, saying, "Then the Lord said, I have pardoned according to your word, but truly as I live, and as all the earth shall be filled with the glory of the Lord, none of the men who have seen my glory and my signs that I did in Egypt and in the wilderness, and yet have put me to the test these 10 times, and have not obeyed my voice, shall see the land that I swore to give to their fathers. and none of those who despised me shall see it. That's Numbers chapter 14, verses 20 through 23. The appearing of the glory of the Lord assured the people that God was with Moses and Aaron. They were his appointed men to serve him. Later in chapter 16, we read about the rebellion of Korah against Moses and Aaron. Starting at verse 19, we learn this. Then Korah assembled all the congregation against them, being Aaron and Moses, at the entrance of the tent of meeting, and the glory of the Lord appeared to all the congregation. That's Numbers chapter 16, verse 19. Continuing at verse 41, we read this. But on the next day all the congregation of the people of Israel grumbled against Moses and against Aaron, saying, You have killed the people of the Lord. And when the congregation had assembled against Moses and against Aaron, they turned toward the tent of meeting. And behold, the cloud covered it, and the glory of the Lord appeared. And Moses and Aaron came to the front of the tent of meeting, and the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, Get away from the midst of this congregation, that I may consume them in a moment. And they fell on their faces. That's Numbers chapter 16, verses 41 through 45. Now in both of these events, the appearance of the glory of the Lord assured the people that he was in their midst through the faithful ministry of Moses and Aaron. The glory of the Lord was there for the benefit of the people. He gave them life and salvation. He bestowed his holiness upon them. When the glory of the Lord physically left the tabernacle in the days of Eli the high priest and his wicked sons Hophni and Phinehas, this was a sign of God's judgment upon the priesthood. As the Spirit of God was taken away from the rebellious King Saul, the glory of the Lord was taken away from the rebellious priests. God raised up Samuel, who served as a prophet, priest, judge, and deliverer. Likewise, God raised up David to serve as king. These actions of God in those days point to the raising up of Jesus to serve as perfect prophet, priest, judge, deliverer, and king. As true God, he serves eternally as our high priest and our king.